everyone. We will switch from English to Russian, whatever is more comfortable for you. Okay, you're also allowed to ask this. Now it's a so-called open lecture. It's with prompt, and we're open for any experiments as you see here at the Team University. I'm very delighted to welcome to our open lecture Ravshan Kadirov, the first deputy of CEO of InfinBANK, but also chief financial officer. Ravshan Kadirov will explain, his biography by himself, but absolutely very impressive studying path, which he went in the US and UK, but also professional career in Uzbekistan is, of course, very, very impressive. But what we will talk about, our course is corporate governance and business ethics. And we actually covered a lot already, more or less, we're at the end of our course. We went through theoretical principles of corporate governance, of the best practice. We discussed different standards, OECD standards, US, UK standards. We analyzed also country-specific standards. But it's now it's a really lecture to talk about more the practical aspects, because it's happened that we know each other from also have the same contacts and friends, and linked with the board of directors. Some directors we know personally, and therefore it's very interesting to see and to learn how, I would say, what you have learned about the corporate governance, including and finance and management internationally, is how it's now implemented in Uzbekistan. How you see the Uzbekistan companies, particularly Uzbekistan banks, are developing. And and then the floor is always open for to your questions, please. Then I would ask you to start with a brief introduction of yourself and your fantastic career path.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mikhail. I really appreciate. It's great to be here, and just by looking at the audience, I think I got 10 years younger. I'm just looking at the audience, and I see young faces. I remember my college years, and I think I'd like to say a few words before we start about the founders of Team University and the spirit at which it operates. I think it's very admirable because I do know some of the shareholders and co-founders of Team University, and I think it's a great long-term investment. And I believe that Hikmat himself is, and his partners are big patriots with a capital P. I think whatever they're doing is very honorable, and to be honest with you, it's not easy to be investing into something like education, which gives a long-term value.
Okay,
Sure.
All right.
Should we use this? Okay. Yeah. As I was saying, I think the founders of this university are on a great mission, and I believe that this is a very rewarding experience for you to be part of this historical moment where you basically see universities like this in Uzbekistan nowadays, which was impossible at my time. You had to go abroad in order to get an education by international standards. So I really applaud the founders, the faculty of Team University, and I wish them best of luck. And I believe that experts like me, if we can bring to the table our humble value and input in terms of the industry trends, I think we'll be more than happy. And that's what I was actually here for. My background, as far as my background, you know, I'm half American, if you will, right? Because I spent more than 10 years in US. My journey to US started from high school. I went through the US Department of State sponsored program. It's called Future Leaders Exchange. I was blessed and lucky, I guess, to have win the contest at that time in order to participate in that program. I was basically not even old enough to get a passport. I was 14. But because it was a U.S. Department of State program, our Ministry of Internal Affairs had the agreement with the U.S. Department of State that you know, the students from high school could attend that program. So they issued a specialized passport and issued a visa in order for us to be able to travel. With me, there were another 3 high school students from Uzbekistan. So total, it was only 4 of us from Uzbekistan. But that program at the time, and I think now they also started their operation again. For a long time it was suspended. It was a great program, which basically entailed cultural exchange between the countries. So that's when my journey started to US. And like I said, I was 14. I went, you know, to American high school, lived in an American family, several of them actually. And it was a great experience. And at that time, obviously, after spending 1 year living in an American host family, experiencing American culture, going to American high school, seeing how the system is different in terms of education. I never thought, for instance, I would be interested in biology because they never used to teach biology in my high school the way they teach it in US. So yeah, after that, I went back to States after coming back from that program, because there was like a 2-year homestay requirement of that program. They just wanted to make sure that you don't want to go back to US too soon and stuff. So yeah, I had to fulfill the 2-year requirement, and you know, independently applied for college. I went to college. After college, I had to graduate, and I was just telling one of your colleagues, the story, comparing the education system of US to ours, where you basically have elective classes, and it doesn't matter what major you're in. For instance, if you're even in business administration, you still get a chance of electing classes, for instance, in science, biology, chemistry. So it was great because I had the opportunity again to relearn physics and chemistry already in college, although we were taught chemistry and physics here in Uzbekistan. But again, I didn't realize that it was so interesting, because the way they teach, the curriculum of all those classes was obviously way more interesting. So yeah, during college, basically, I had to, you know, work obviously to put myself through college at that time. That was also kind of a rewarding experience. That's when you really become, you know, independent, try to make a living. Although you have a, you know, scholarship and stuff, still day-to-day living could be, you know, expensive, and it's always good to have cash money. So I did a lot of business ventures when I was a student, but I think one of the most highlights, I think, experiences of US college is how did I manage to graduate in 4 years exactly, because I had to gain more than 140 credits in total in order to be eligible to graduate. So what I did is, obviously, I calculated my 4th year last semester. I had to take 8 classes, and they were all like,
it was loud,
400 or 500 level classes. They're tough classes, and by the internal policy of the university, even American students, let alone international, were not allowed to take more than 6 classes.
Yes, 3 placements.
Because that's when you start compromising the quality. But then I found that there is a loophole in the system, because if they can, you know, limit 6 classes per student, then I would basically enroll in all 6 classes my 2nd semester of 4th year. And then the loophole that I found, that my university could not prohibit me to take classes in other universities. So I basically applied to a different university in the same state, and I was lucky enough to get admitted. And before applying, I just checked that if you take those 2 classes that I needed for graduation, you can transfer the credit hours to your university thereby fulfilling the requirement. So I attended two universities
smart.
at the same time, my fourth year, and I was lucky enough to finish them. That was the toughest fourth year, and then I fortunately be able to transfer those two classes from the other university. And the dean's office thought that I did something illegal. They just kept checking and double checking. How did you manage? What's going on? Because you have to put in an application for graduation ceremony. And I put in an application and they rejected it because they remember rejecting me taking two additional classes. But then I got a letter from the university saying that it's okay, I'm taking those classes somewhere else and I will transfer the credit hours. So yeah, that was the highlight. And I managed to go through several interviews, mostly with banks, insurance companies, investment management companies. And out of those interviews, I chose Citibank because I believe Citibank is a global bank and the corporate values of Citibank and in general, whatever the bank offers was really interesting for me. So during this entire time of the last semester where I was taking 6 classes basically, 2 in one and 4 in the other university, it was difficult because I had to manage the work and plus I had to manage all these interviews, and there were like 3-level interviews, serious essays, and different types of on-site examinations that they did. But luckily my graduation was basically in 2008 May, and by March I was lucky enough to pass the last exam and the interview. It was a 3rd level for a city, and I got an offer. But because I was graduating in May, they said that I could start right off the graduation. So I think I was really blessed and lucky to basically, I still remember, to graduate on May 10th, 2008, and then start my job at Citi May 12th. It was just like perfectly aligned. And for international students, you obviously have to have an official job in your field in order to remain 1 more year in US legally.
Okay.
Otherwise, you have to leave and go back home. So everything worked out well. I started my work at Citi. I was able to get my optional practical training. That way I didn't break the law, stayed in the US for another year. So yeah, that's how basically I got into the banking industry. It was more related to credit derivatives, swaps, collateralized debt obligations. At that time in 2008, if you remember, big financial crisis hit US. Lehman Brothers went down, other financial institutions were in trouble, and it was all because of those basically CDOs that were invented at that time, and the market went bust, and it was a big, I basically, one of my last research papers, fresh off, was written literally about that financial crisis that was going on at the time. And the US Congress approved the TARP Commission, the commission that is basically responsible for securing the banks and doing mergers and acquisitions in order to save some of the banks from the troubled assets. So yeah, I think it was lucky for me because I got to experience the hands-on effects of the financial crisis at that time, what was going on in the market, how the US Federal Reserve responded to the crisis, how the, basically the President's office administration responded to the crisis, how the markets responded. It was really a great experience to witness all that. After that, I basically came back to Uzbekistan. I actually had to come back to Uzbekistan 2-3 times in order to get used to, because a lot of people ask you if you live in, US more than 10 years, they're like, what are you doing here? Why didn't you stay over there? It's not easy to get adapted. It was my 3rd try. First try, I came back, and at that time, banking industry did not really need a guy like me who was basically in risk management, treasury, and finance, because the banking industry was in nascent stages. Banks did not really understand or did not really need specialists like that. There were no areas like that. So teaching was actually paying really well. And at that time, at Management Development Institution of MDIS Singapore, that's where I taught for about 2 years, because teaching paid more than the banking did at that time. And then I had to go back to US, and then for personal reasons had to come back. Basically in the banking industry of Uzbekistan, I worked at Hamkor Bank, which is one of the largest privately owned banks, and it has a foreign shareholders, IFC, FMO Development Bank, and obviously because it's been in the market more than 30 years with the international shareholders, all of the corporate governance systems, I think, were more or less in place in that bank. And I really enjoyed working there for about 4 years. The biggest thing probably I did is open up a US correspondent account, which took about 3 years to open. It was also an interesting story. But after that, I transferred to Osaka Bank, a bank that is undergoing transformation and privatization. It was third, but now I think is the fourth largest bank by assets. They're working with EBRD on privatization and transformation. That's when basically, with some of our friends and colleagues with international experience on the supervisory board level, I really got the hands-on experience what it is actually the transformation. And I think transformation, basically, whether you think about a person or organization, transformation for me is basically becoming the best version of yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think your question lies, Mikhail, about the importance of corporate governance, because after having worked 4 years and boiling inside of the attempts of the transformation, I came to realization that at the core of transformation and change management is corporate governance.
Okay, interesting.
If there is no corporate governance, change management and transformation in areas like risk, compliance, treasury, finance, data analytics, IT, I would say not useless, but not as useful if you had the corporate governance to put in place first and then start the transformation. Because if the corporate governance is not in place, all these transformation efforts, they're not going to yield much of a result in terms of conflicts of interests, in terms of the resistance to change, in terms of the proper environment for a change. Because 4 years being in the midst of transformation, I realized that it's not about the processes or even the theoretical or even the practical part of the transformation. It's more about the mindset. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't change the mindset of the people via effective corporate governance system, that will ensure that all the proper processes and systems in place in order to absorb the necessary change and implement it into real life world, it's useless. Mm-hmm. If you see people basically resisting the change and saying, we don't want to get out of the comfort zone because we've been working like this, why do we need to basically implement all these new things? Why are you causing us headache? Process can be very tough and painful. It's basically like Americans say, pulling teeth, So 4 years going through that, I finally ended up in InfinBANk. Mm-hmm. Finally, I think at InfinBANk now I have the opportunity to basically accumulate all the experience, knowledge, both international, local, on management board level, on supervisory board level, coupled and powered by the knowledge and experience of what it really means to have corporate governance system in place. Now I finally be able to basically do a full feature transformation on an example of one bank. And that's why nowadays, for the past 7 months that I've been in InfinBANk, coming out of this experience, I started off with corporate governance at this time. Because I was part of the transformation and privatization in a state bank, where I joined the bank as a head of treasury. So I was a director of a narrow single field within which I did transformation and put together a treasury management system basically from the scratch. Mm-hmm. Because state banks did not really care about treasury. There was no need to do asset liability management because state banks, they're private, they're subsidized. Ministry of Finance provides them financing at 2%. They put their 2% margin and on lend at 4%, right? And that's it. Osaka Bank was in automobile industry. SQB was in oil and gas. National Bank is basically, it's government's bank, right? Hypotheca was in mortgages. So the banking sector was basically divided between 10 banks who own 85% of the banking assets, and then the rest of the 15 were divided among few private banks who did not compete or didn't have the reason to compete with each other because the market is so big. It's literally unsaturated. And now what's so interesting is that what Uzbekistan banks or organizations used to think that corporate governance systems is irrelevant to us. It's some theoretical thing that's in the books. Guess what? Now it's right here, right now. And I think the banks or organizations that do not understand the importance of corporate governance and will not be able to implement it today will be the ones who will see their share in the market decrease, will be the ones who will not be able to compete in the current industry. And I'm already seeing this with my own eyes. So that's why I started off with corporate governance, and we had an agreement that we will be inviting first ever independent international supervisory board member in the 18 years of history of InfinBANK, which I think is a big challenge for the bank, but at the same time it's a step forward. Because I thought that if we're going to invite an independent supervisory board member who can weigh in on everything corporate governance related, put together a good HR system, or oversee the organization of the bank, make sure that there are no conflicts of interest between the management and supervisory board, and plus to implement not only KPI system for management board or middle management, because that's something that you usually do, but even implement performance review for supervisory board members itself, which was a surprise for InfinBank because their supervisory board members thought that they're only accountable with only some of the written policies and procedures that they're responsible for. So that's why I started off with corporate governance, but at the same time at InfinBank we're trying to transform organization completely. We have a compliance system, risk management system, treasury, finance. All these key areas are also being transformed. But like I said, at the core, Mikhail, is the corporate governance system. And I really think the more I'm getting into this, the more now the independent supervisory has joined and we're having talks. We invited Ernst & Young in order to, believe it or not, most of the banks, that's how at nascent stage the corporate governance is still. And that's how I'm afraid the banking industry and in general Uzbekistan is not taking corporate governance seriously, because believe it or not, even in private banks, it's hard to make sure that the corporate governance is taken seriously. So that's why we're inviting companies like Ernst & Young, KPMG, different types of strategic partners in order to ensure that we have trainings and seminars on the importance of corporate governance on supervisory board level, management board level, and middle management. So I really believe that the core of any change or effective organization lies in effective corporate governance system. And I will tirelessly be preaching to any organization, please start taking corporate governance seriously today. In Uzbekistan, this corporate governance system and concept and in general, everything related to corporate governance is not anymore something that is theoretical, that is taught in international universities and applied at companies like Coca-Cola, IBM, or Microsoft, and you think that our companies are not mature enough to adopt the concepts of corporate. Please don't think that. It's already relevant, and I think we can speak to the success of companies like, for instance, Korzinka or Akfa Holding, right? And I can name other few who are successful because they start experimenting and implementing corporate governance systems long before other companies did. And I think that's why their success speaks for itself. And I think now they have the competitive advantage and lead in the industry compared to their peers.
Right. Thank you really for very strong support for corporate governance, because I agree sometimes it may be not the obvious subject when you start at the universities, and you might say, why was studying this? We're not entering or not going to manage large state or public companies. we're at the beginning of our career, and if we talk about the finance management or strategic management, it's understandable. Corporate governance is like far, far away, but you highlighted brilliantly that corporate governance, it's a system. It's a way of thinking, how the business should be organized, and what are this all different control instruments and procedures you need in the system. All this, I would say, healthy tension which you need between different stakeholders. We talk a lot about the sources of corporate governance, the split between ownership and control. Of course, there is a role of board of directors to ensure that the management is acting in interest of the company, or in interests of, now we're taking wider, in interest of communities, or employees, or stakeholders, other stakeholders. It is very interesting. As I said, please think already about your question. Thank you very much for really this detailed explanation about your professional path. The question, you touch a very interesting question, corporate governance and transformations. And I'd like to ask the first question in respect of transformation. It is a critical. This is like a word which is repeated very often, and particularly the state-owned companies are going through the transformation. Sometimes they are really forced by the government to, and we know there are some decrees of the president or of the government which force the companies to go through transformation, because it is really a required and necessary step to increase the shareholder value, to be more attractive for investors. And without those steps, you wouldn't be able to realize successful privatization. This is what I'm saying. My question is, who should be driving the transformation? Because now we see, at some extent, the government is driving, but maybe isn't it, board of directors, which should be driving also the transformation, initiate, because board of directors is very close to day-to-day operations, or management, as you said. Sometimes management is very comfortable with the situation as it is now, and maybe is not always the right, let's say, institution and body to drive the transformation. This is how. What are you saying? What play, for example, like what the board of directors' role is in driving the transformation?
Yes, thank you. You're asking questions that are like pushing the pinpoints.
Yeah.
I could talk about this for days, I think.
Sure.
Because I think whatever you're asking is more related to the privatization and transformation of state-owned banks. Mm-hmm. Which is, the answer is, I think all interested, or I would say all involved parties, mm-hmm. need to be part of the transformation. And involved parties is Ministry of Finance, Management Board, Supervisory Board, even at times I would say Central Bank. Mm-hmm. And I think the important key element here is, now that I have boiled in this transformation efforts for about 4 years in a state bank, and I look back, what could be done differently or maybe effectively in order to drive the transformation efforts better? I would say alignment of interests. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because that's where I see the core problem, is that there is no alignment of interests. Whereas government is pushing and encouraging transformation and privatization, therefore Ministry of Finance is assigning supervisory board members with international experience who want to drive that change. But at the same time, the management board and that very same supervisory board are getting conflicting directions in terms of the strategic approach of basically putting the processes together, or maybe even the strategic approach related to operations. So whenever you have a desire to transform, but then at the same time in reality involve parties who are responsible for supervising the bank, who are responsible for providing funding, or who are responsible for making important decisions, have interests that are varying from that desire to transform, that's when you're going to basically see that back and forth.
Sure.
That's when you're going to see the conflicts of interest. So that's why I think I understand that it's probably easy to pinpoint the problems rather than finding solutions to them. But I really think that if we try enough and hard enough, we can at least try to separate the current operations of the bank with the strategic aims that the bank is trying to pursue, and basically have this kind of a concept where we outline 10 most important strategic changes that we want to implement in 1 year in a state bank, and put key metrics on that, and make sure that central bank, Ministry of Finance, Supervisory Board, Management Board are all aware and working towards that same goal of achieving at least 10 measurable, concrete, strategic basically outputs that we're trying to achieve. Everything else could be going business as usual. Because I myself understand the importance of the state banks. Like I mentioned, they used to, before the privatization of OTP, Ipoteka, they used to own about 85% of the banking assets, which is a lot. And I myself is the first one, as a citizen of this country to begin with, as a patriot, right?
Yeah.
I am the one to tell the international organization who wants to privatize state banks like Asaka, SQB, or any other bank, that they need to also align their expectations in terms of privatization correctly. Why? Because we cannot just take state banks who've been working in the market for 25 to 30 years and who are responsible to financing different types of economic sectors of Uzbekistan that are largely responsible for the biggest output of GDP. You cannot just overnight optimize them, restructure them, and then make them basically concentrating in a different segment, because there are a lot of inputs there. For instance, one large state bank could have $1 to $2 billion exposure on some key industry related product production or factories that provide employment, that provide the necessary basically taxes for the government, that provide the necessary raw materials, critical minerals, you name it, basically, right?
Yeah.
And you have to understand that the reason that they're being able to work and provide all that to the economy and that make up the biggest part of the GDP of Uzbekistan is because they got the funding from those state banks. And those state banks provided the funding, some of it due to the Ministry of Finance support, some of it due to the external credit facilities provided by international financial institutions that provided that funding for a very long term under certain conditions that need to be met. So you cannot just take that away, restructure it the way you want to overnight. That's why I am the biggest proponent saying you have to do a very precision surgical approach in terms of looking at the balance sheet of each separate state bank, making sure that you're not going to compromise the parts of the balance sheet that are financing the critical parts of the economy, right? And somehow come up with a way to restructure them individually. Take that, please, into account whenever you're trying to privatize the state banks. But most of the financial institutions, sometimes they want quick gains. They want to come in and say, you know what, let's remove this, add this, subtract this, divide this, multiply by this, and then by 2 years, you'll be shooting through the roof, you'll have the best ROE, ROA, and everything. But does that align with national interest of Uzbekistan is my question. What happens to all those jobs, factories, production facilities, and all that important part of the GDP? Because we have to understand that during the transition stage, Uzbekistan is still dependent on the heavy subsidy from the government to the vulnerable part of the society. Unless we're going to have the GDP per capita increased to a reasonable amount where our economy will be self-sustainable, this is the reality. We have to put up with a system where we're building the free market economy, but at the same time not forgetting that we have one of the largest populations in Central Asia, right? And we have to somehow support the society in terms of affordability of mortgages and housing, in terms of lower unemployment rate, in terms of lower rate of inflation, in terms of making education free and accessible, in terms of making healthcare affordable. You know, all these societal issues are also very important, right? We cannot only focus through the prism of transforming one state bank that is going to be supporting private sector and SME, which is supposedly then fix everything overnight, because those private sectors and SMEs are market driven. They would know how to support the economy in which places, and thereby they will create the optimal structure of supply and demand in the economy, which is going undergoing transition. And I really think that the government intervention, very again precision and accurate government intervention, is also necessary.
Right. Okay. Of course, you're raising the very interesting question how to coordinate this state-driven transformation at the top level. Vitaly, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you for your speech. So I have some questions for you. So how do you think are people ready for corporate governance, and how the businessmen and other investors are ready for corporate governance in Uzbekistan?
Yeah, good question. I like simple, straightforward questions. Cut to the chase. Are we ready or not? I really think that it depends. Like I mentioned and gave example of some of the companies, I really think that most of the companies are understanding the importance of it, but understanding and being ready, unfortunately, I feel like two different things. When you talk to different companies, they're saying, look, I really think that, we need to pay attention to this because something weird is going on now in the market. We cannot have a centralized decision-making system without those balances and checks that you mentioned in the organization that creates that healthy friction in terms of managing the organization. Because the companies that are used to do business in virtually no competition or limited competition, unfortunately, spoiled by the attention that the market gives to them. Why? Because in general, when the economy is closed, there is less competition, and there are certain policies and procedures in terms of export and import operations and regulating the market in general, which provides even more competitive advantage to those very few companies. So now we see all those factors moving. We see that the competition increasing because more and more companies in different fields are being able to open and operate business, including foreign ones in Uzbekistan. On top of that, we're attempting to harmonize our export-import operation procedures and regulations, policies, and laws with those that are required by the World Trade Organization, because we want to access the WTO, right? So all those moving parts are now basically creating an environment where you need to think fast and be ready fast. But unfortunately, what I see is a lot of the organizations are still thinking that corporate governance is important, but they're not willing to take that swift step towards saying, okay, we understood that it's important, let's now do something about it. I really think that most of the organizations are getting stuck at the point where they're understanding. But that is not to say I want to blame them, because the important part of your question, I think, will basically be about why are they getting stuck in this transition phase of realizing that it's important but not doing anything about it? Because lack of knowledge. And that's where I really think universities like TEAM and others, people like you yourself, Mikhail, are very important in terms of popularizing the corporate governance and its importance in terms of providing the next generation of students with the necessary education, because even if you understand what it is, you just have to have the right people in order to put that together for you. And unfortunately, our education system, before universities like TEAM started to, basically implement courses like this and having international standard education applied in Uzbekistan, our universities did not teach what is corporate governance. It was, like I said, some theoretical thing that is in the textbook, which is impossible to apply to Uzbekistan reality, which made it even worse for people not to pay attention to the importance of it. And now that it's becoming ever more so important, we lack the knowledge and we lack the human skills in order to put that system together. I really think that is the reason why some of the companies are getting stuck in this phase where they're like, yeah, we understand, but they cannot graduate to the actual action phase of implementing corporate governance. So I think the sooner we will put together education system in place, the sooner we have appropriate human skills and students like you graduating with the knowledge of and importance of corporate governance, the sooner that transition stage will become even more relevant and real.
Yeah. Yeah, just, I would like to join you really on this question. And a couple of comments. First of all, remember, now I'm speaking like a university professor. Remember that corporate governance, it's not only voluntarily movement. The governments of all countries, which we discuss, UK, US, forced the companies to implement the corporate governance because of their responsibility. We were talking about public companies, which have over thousands shareholders, and there is obligation in front of this shareholders, very wide range of shareholders. And Ravshan has reminded us on the crisis in 2007, 2008. We talk about the crisis, Enron crisis 2000. Many in the UK. All those crises led to the governments of those countries to develop and to force and to enforce the implementation of corporate governance. Therefore, we need to remember the corporate governance. It's like, for example, tax in the system and finance. If you want to be the citizen of our country, you have to work and pay taxes, and for this you will see some benefits from the governments, etc. It's like a compulsory system. The same in the management. The government say, if you would like to raise capital on the stock exchange, if you would like to get access to cheaper capital, then you have some obligations. Yes, and I would say in Uzbekistan we see already very positive developments. Particularly, I would say the state-owned banks. Maybe they didn't have this understanding. They were more forced to implement corporate governance, but now they realize that they can use this corporate governance more effectively. My concern is about the private sector. And the readiness for corporate governance in the private sector, when you don't have this obligation, strongly linked with the mentality of the owner. Because remember, the corporate governance is the step to share your power. As the owner, you say, I cannot manage the company by myself anymore. Do everything. I cannot be manager, for everything. I have to delegate the responsibility. As soon as I delegate responsibility, I have to supervise these actions. I need corporate governance also to help me. In one of our program of executive education, I have been interviewing also one of the co-founder of Team University, Zafar Hashimov, and he explained, for example, some benefits of the board of directors. He said, I created the board of directors, I saw only as advisors, that they recommend me that provide with good ideas. But then those people said, look, if you really want board of directors, then we shouldn't be only advisors. We should take responsibility for the strategies. We should be opponent to your ideas. Doesn't matter that you are majority shareholder. We are board of directors. And this is the mentality question. And I believe what I see, I talk to a lot of owners, they understand, that the company will benefit from proper corporate governance. But to make the step this, when you give away some of your power and focus not anymore directly on, on operational activities of the companies, you focus on working with the board of directors, thinking more from the top of the company. Those are, very important mental steps to be ready for corporate governance. This is what I, would. Okay, go ahead.
If I recall correctly, you mentioned that in a transformation phase, you are basically building the start of the corporate governance, right? And what I want to know is how is that process? Because just if you apply it to modern technology, it's not going to solve itself because there's human errors. They are bound to make mistakes. As well as the follow-up question is, do you offer like consulting for other banks so they can catch on to this trend that you are initiating? Because it seems that you really care for everyone to start having this in their system. It's a daily process. So I was wondering if consulting is your way to go.
Yeah, I'm glad the part that is related to care is noticed because I do honestly care. And to be honest with you, I care not only on the level of InfinBANK or Osaka Bank, or I care on the level of the banking industry in general. And that's what I tell all of my colleagues, because right now I think things like corporate governance, risk management, financial management, everything related to treasury, trade solutions, everything related to compliance are such a important, significant and broad areas that I think the banking industry in general will benefit if everything will start taking seriously. And instead of competing, I would encourage the banking industry, the regulators, to cooperate with each other. Because the more we're going to cooperate, the more we're going to understand the issues in implementation, the more understand we're going to issues that we're discussing today, the better we're going to learn from each other, and the faster the learning curve will go in terms of implementing this. And unfortunately, I'm not myself a consultant, but it's funny that you should mention this in your question, because to be honest with you, I start actually looking at something that is of my interest, especially after Osaka Bank experience, is that I am not particularly interested in one specific area of banking, although my specific areas, my background is risk, financial risk management, treasury, capital markets. But I figured that the more I go on this journey of transformation, on the example of the third bank now in Uzbekistan, the more I feel like I more enjoy the change management and transformation of the bank as a whole, rather than managing one specific particular area, if that makes sense. Before I used to think that, okay, banking career, and I think anyone thinks like that, right? You'll be like, okay, in the banking, I'm very good at lending, so I'll be leading the corporate lending department, and I'm going to become the head of the corporate lending department, and the next career phase is basically, deputy head or deputy CEO and stuff, right? But as I go on through my banking career, I think I really very much enjoyed the fact that I was part of the transformation, because I get to know a little bit about every single area. For instance, I'm not a compliance officer. I never worked directly in compliance, but I could totally now, thanks to my efforts in transformation and thanks to my colleagues in supervisory board and different types of international experts in my previous workplaces, I was able to do a deep dive into compliance matters and really understand why compliance, just like corporate governance, for instance, important for for the bank. Same goes for other areas like internal audit. Same goes for other areas, investor relations. Same goes for other areas related to, for instance, lending, because I never really worked at lending. You know, I'm not a a person who underwrites or analyzes projects in loans, right? Or I never been in a credit committee. But because of my efforts in transformation, I had the luck to basically participate in every single phase that is important. Why? Because, for instance, in international development institutions like European Bank for Reconstructional Development, Asian Development Bank, International Finance Corporation, they all have very big, deep capacity development programs to launch the transformation in a state bank or private bank, which includes all the key areas of the bank. And because I was involved in the transformation, I obviously had the chance to look at all those areas. So I really think that, going back to that consultancy question that you asked, I do sometimes say that I am a consultant, but which is full-time hired by the bank, internal, because usually the people who work with consultants complain that consultants come and they consult, but then they leave it up to you whether you're going to implement it or not. And it really is true. If you're going to implement that stuff that they consult, then you're really going to see the results. But I'm the one who consults and then actually rolls up his sleeves and works at the bank in order to implement that together with the team until I see the results. So in that sense, I guess I'm very much into the process. In terms of your first question, how well do I think the implementation of these things will go on? Again, it depends on change management. I would say that neither in state banks nor in private, in my practice, and maybe this is my disadvantage, is that it goes at a speed that you plan to. For instance, to me, honestly, if I look at the industry, whether it's manufacturing, oil and gas, telecom, banking, you name it, I really think the transformation efforts of especially state-owned enterprises could be going at much faster speed than they are, right? For instance, if they could possibly be going at 200 miles an hour for now, my approximate answer in terms of how fast they're going, 50 at best. And that is sort of discouraging maybe for us to see. But then again, because I know the flip side of it in the example of state banks and how the interests are not aligned and how there are so many other factors such as social factors, macroeconomical factors, policy factors, different types of other factors that go into play in these kind of change managements. I really think that maybe it's best that they're going slower. That way perhaps they can make sure that at least we're going safer. But again, because of the safety, do we want to compromise the speed? That's another question too. So that's why it's two-sided basically, right? You wish that it could be going faster. For instance, I could name different types of SOEs. I think there are 18 state-owned organizations, including 3 banks inside of those 18, that Franklin Templeton is now going to be managing.
Yes.
In terms of change management, corporate governance, and all these key areas. Maybe, I hope projects like this will show that this could be done faster, and at the same time by not compromising safety. So that's why, I really think that we could, but again, lack of knowledge, lack of skills, lack of people, again, we go back to that, right? Because it's so easy to say, why we're not doing this? We know that it's important. But if you go to organizations, for instance, like Uzbekistan Airways, huge organization.
Yes.
I mean, just think about it. How many different types of international contracts and obligations and liabilities and covenants they have. It's so multi-layered in terms of its corporate governance systems. Where do you even begin to change is the question, right? Especially when you lack people and knowledge. So that's why I think, again, going back to education and whatever the founders of your university are doing is really worth of applaud, because the sooner the universities like TEAM will provide highly skilled professionals into the market, the better it is, and I think that will be the impulse of change. And I really think looking ahead, that's my estimate, is that during, during the previous era of Uzbekistan, if you will, if we had the capacity of human knowledge and skills, but we didn't have the systems and willingness in place, now it's basically, if you think about it, vice versa. We now have the willingness to change,
Yes.
willingness to implement, but now we lack the capacity. Why? Because there was a lot of, and we have to, I think, admit, brain leakage, right, if you will. And now, in order to sustain and compensate for that brain leakage, I think the universities like TEAM are working really hard. And my forecast is, hopefully, in few years, Uzbekistan will come to a phase where all of these efforts of universities like TEAM providing highly skilled professionals to the labor market will shoot all at once. And hopefully that will tip the scales and balance it in terms of the capacity and the availability of the highly skilled labor.
Yeah. No, fantastic. Yeah, it's all these changes. Absolutely, it's about mindset and changing the mindset about all this the corporate governance or best practices which should be implemented, and education, of course, provide and help to develop to change this mindset. But coming to the, like you mentioned, the TEAM University, and TEAM University is an entrepreneurial university, which is promoted, and we are proud of this focus. What would you recommend to our students? Because we are focusing on them on starting their own startups, starting new businesses. What elements of corporate governance you would recommend them to implement anyway, even with the small startups? Because talking about the state-owned enterprises, students might think, oh, it's about the big corporations only. But there are many elements of corporate governance which could be implemented already at the beginning. What would you recommend?
Yes, thank you, Mikhail, for kind of setting us for the straight path in terms of, that we make it relevant to students as well. I really think that everything that we discussed so far in terms of the importance of processes, people, corporate governance, strategic management are all relevant, no matter what the scale of your business is. It's just a matter of how you apply it, right? Because I think at the end of the day, any business will have a dream to become a big corporation, right? And I think the sustainable path to become a big business, even though you start small, is realizing that these things are important at the outset. And I really think that entrepreneurs in Uzbekistan who are successful today would really attest to that, because absence of the knowledge and the importance of these concepts being applied in real life in the Uzbekistan market and Uzbekistan reality basically had them growing their knowledge and experience together with their business. So I would really think that students of TEAM University with a spirit of entrepreneurship, if they will graduate from this university with the knowledge that these type of macro, systemic, strategic, important concepts are important and how to apply them, and they will start the small business with that idea already in their head, that will give them twice as advantage. Because then they know exactly what things they need to apply in their small business in order to achieve scale. And once they hopefully reach that success and become a big business or corporation, they would for sure know how to sustain that as well because of this knowledge, right? When it comes to entrepreneurial part of it, again, I think it's a very unique approach that TEAM University takes in terms of emphasizing their knowledge to entrepreneurs. Our president has been emphasizing this, and like I said, in the transition stage, until at least we will reach the maturity level of the private sector, because we know that even in the developed countries, private sector is the backbone of any economy that provides jobs, taxes, right, and different types of opportunities and innovation come from there. In terms of entrepreneurship and relevance of your knowledge to entrepreneurial skills, I think I would, think important to make one factor clear, that in terms of entrepreneurial skills, being able to take and manage risks is the most important, at least one of the most important elements. Because all of us talk about success in life, in school, right? But I don't think, Mikhail, we emphasize in our education facilities or throughout our mature life, at least I haven't exercised this, or nobody taught me or talked to me about failure. And as a relatively straightforward A student who, saw the world as a place where, whatever I touch or whatever I do needs to absolutely end up with a success, because you're so idealistic and so nascent and so, if you will, naive, right? You're never taught how to face failure. And I really think that could be a very stressful circumstance when someone doesn't warn you that failure is something that is normal. And if you're not failing, that means you're not even trying. But unfortunately, these are the words that I heard only when I got to States. When I start taking failure normally, and when I realize the more I fail, the more my chances to succeed are increasing. So that's why I would say that university can teach you the necessary education, theoretical knowledge, and even the skills perhaps to succeed, but be aware that failure is inevitable. And whenever you face your first failure, you will know exactly what I'm talking about, because it's going to sting, it's going to hurt, it's going to be not pleasant. But remember that feeling and capture that feeling. When it's so painful because you first time faced failure, and the more you're going to be able to withstand the stress of that failure, I think the more you're going to be able to succeed in life. That's why don't let the failure to discourage you. Welcome the opportunities to take risks, calculated risks. Be able to have the tolerance and managerial and strategic skills to manage those risks appropriately. Because after all, entrepreneurs basically get paid depending on how well they manage the risk. You cannot do business in the absolute absence of risk. You do business only in the presence of risks, and your success is determined by how well then you're managing those risks. And the corporate governance, if we again come back to corporate governance and tie it to risk management, is basically the processes and systems that make sure that you manage the risk in the most effective and efficient manner. So that's why if you're not failing, you're not even trying, basically. So that's why don't be afraid to fail. And I think one of another skills that entrepreneurs usually have, at least the successful ones that I talk to, is commitment and consistency. Because if you're not committed to something, you won't be able to start. But if you're not consistent, you can't finish. It's all about discipline. It's all about doing the same thing over and over and over again. But we're humans, right? We cannot feel the same every day. One time you feel good about going to gym and working out. Another day you feel lazy.
Yes.
Or you don't have the mood. Or you don't feel that it's important. And you ask yourself a question, why am I doing this? But guess what? Doing that and continuing doing that, regardless of how you feel, is going to yield a result. And not all the people can sustain that path, unfortunately. So that's why, I would say that don't be afraid to be daring and bold. Don't be afraid to take risks, manage risks, and make sure that you as a young generation, up and coming generation, will be more forward looking, more innovative, because this age is now changing. You see what's going on with AI, you see what's going on with machine learning, you see what's going on with technology, geopolitics, geoeconomics, you see what's going on with all the external, internal risk factors that we're facing in today's reality. So that's why I think ahead of you, you have a very exciting but at the same time challenging future. And I really hope that whenever you graduate and start business, risk ratio of capital in Uzbekistan, if not equal to US, will be somewhere close to it, because I all the time
Because
mention
yes,
this
it's
too.
increasing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that's why, be daring, bold, take risks, manage risk, and hopefully one day you will be able to look back at your years in Team University and will be proud of yourself, just like the founders of your university, because you can tell yourself that you're self-made.
Yeah. No, fantastic closing remarks, really. Any questions? No, then now, yes, let me thank Rana. Yes, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And actually what you do by promoting, increasing awareness of corporate governance is sometimes more effective than individual consulting. Thank you very much for doing this.
Present from us.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Right.